Welcome to TWiT, where this week we're talking good security education, bad ransomware actors, and a guest who will help you understand how to justify the cloud.
This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Securing every access point in your company doesn't have to be a challenge. LastPass unifies access and authentication to making securing your employees simple and secure, even when they're working remotely. Check out LastPass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 419, recorded November 13, 2020, Justifying the Cloud.
This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Thinking about moving your data storage to the cloud? Wasabi is enterprise-class cloud storage at 1/5 the price of Amazon S3 and faster than the competition with no fees for egress or API requests and no complex storage tiers. Start a free trial at wasabi.com and enter code ENTERPRISE. And by Barracuda. Did you know that 95% of all cyber attacks start with an email? To uncover the threats hiding in your Office 365 account, get a secure and free email threat scan at barracuda.com/enterprise. And by Melissa. Like expired milk, 30% of your customer data goes bad every year. That's money down the drain. Visit Melissa's developer portal for free access to data quality APIs, demos, and code samples. Freshen up your sour data today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit.
Welcome to This Week in Enterprise Tech, your regular source for all the news that, well, is news in enterprise IT technology. It's where the cool kids gather to find out what's going on. Now, the observant regular viewers will notice that I am not Louis Maresca. Our normal host is off doing important things. In the meantime, you've got me, Curt Franklin, senior editor at Dark Reading, and Brian McHenry, who is, well, as far as I know, the king of everything security over at F5. Brian, welcome back to This Week in Enterprise Tech. Thanks for being my cohort this week.
I couldn't be happier to be back, Curt. And, not everyone could fill good old Louis Maresca's shoes, but if I could count on one person to do it, it's you.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm hoping that if I fill in enough, somehow the hair will transfer over. That's what I'm really looking for. Well, until that happens, we have a great show coming up for you here on this week's episode. You've got me and Brian McHenry, and we have a great guest. Chris Rechtsteiner of Server Central Touring Group is going to be here to talk to us about cloudy things. Now, we know that there is no enterprise IT without the cloud these days. We're going to have a great talk about what's going on with Server Central and their cloud. Before we get to all that, though, we've got some news to bring you. We're going to start off with the blips. Well, it wouldn't be a week if we couldn't talk about rising ransomware threats. And in a report released this week, security firm Dragos points to multiple code bases, including ECANS, Megacortex, and CLOP, that now include code for stopping processes in industrial control systems. And they point to multiple public ransomware incidents that shut down manufacturing firms. Ransomware groups are increasingly adopting techniques that could be used to hurt the operations of manufacturing companies, such as incorporating code that looks for and exploits ICSs and can spread from IT networks to OT networks. While other types of attacks have targeted manufacturers, ransomware poses the most risk in 2020, especially for many critical subsectors of the industry, says Selena Larson, senior cyber threat analyst at Dragos. In 2019, Dragos Incident Response Team found 2/3 of incidents involved attackers accessing an ICS directly from the internet, while all attacks were able to connect out from their operational environments, allowing adversaries to exfiltrate data. In its report, Dragos also warned that adversaries, especially nation-state actors, were targeting manufacturers' intellectual property and that third-party suppliers and partners were often compromised as a way into a manufacturer's network. In general, many ransomware attacks do seem connected to nation-state actors and are likely a way for some actors to gain experience and funding. Dragos' Larson believes nation-state actors likely use attacks on manufacturing networks as a way of training to compromise other critical infrastructure.
Insecure APIs are a growing risk for organizations. And just as we can't talk enough about malware, the cloud, when it talks about enterprise tech, we've got to talk about application programming interfaces, or APIs, that are used to connect enterprise applications and data to the internet and are subject to the same vulnerabilities as a regular web application and need to be addressed with at least the same rigor. In fact, the direct external access to transaction updates and mass data that APIs enable subject them to additional threats that web applications rarely encounter, according to Forrester Research. In a report summarizing some of the major security issues surrounding API use, the analyst firm warned about API breaches becoming increasingly common and the next big attack vector for threat actors. As organizations secure their web applications, they can't forget about APIs, says Forrester analyst Sandy Carielli. Security pros must specifically build in API security and not assume that it's rolled into their existing web application protections.
Well, a new Costa Rica hack-for-hire group is targeting global businesses. This new hack-for-hire group has been employing custom malware in attacks that target disparate victims worldwide, with the largest concentration in South Asia. That's according to BlackBerry researchers. This group of APT mercenaries, dubbed Costa Rica by BlackBerry's research and intelligence team, has targeted organizations in countries across Europe, the Americas, Africa, Australia, and Asia, particularly in India, Bangladesh, and Singapore. While Costa Rica has been on the team's radar since January of this year, it estimates that it's been active since late 2019. The emergence of this group underscores a broader trend of mercenary APT groups appearing on the threat landscape. These attackers' tactics, techniques, and procedures resemble those seen in advanced nation-state attacks, but their victim profiles and geographies are too diverse to be aligned with a single attacker's goals. Costa Rica, for example, uses a combination of bespoke malware and off-the-shelf tools to infiltrate target organizations. In a write-up of their findings on Costa Rica, researchers say their tools' constant development, detailed versioning system, and well-structured code that allows for expansion of functionality all indicate that the group's toolset is part of a long-term project rather than a one-off campaign. Right now, it's unclear exactly what the group's motivations are. They seem to be laying the groundwork for something bigger, says Eirik Millum, Vice President of Research Operations at BlackBerry. He notes that much of their activity was intended to hide lateral movement, conceal data exfiltration, and hide other nefarious tasks.
Well, SpaceX's Starlink has had some hiccups as expected, but users overall seem to be impressed. When SpaceX opened the Starlink public beta, which is SpaceX's attempt to offer high-speed internet access across the globe using low Earth orbit satellites, the company told users to expect brief periods of no connectivity at all over the first few months. And it's one of the reasons the SpaceX calls this testing period the better than nothing beta. Early reports from Starlink beta testers confirm that users are suffering from this problem to some extent, but Starlink's overall performance has wowed beta testers, many of whom previously had no access to modern broadband speeds. Link stability is a little rough, Reddit user Exodatum wrote on the Starlink subreddit yesterday. We're getting jumps bad enough to disconnect us from connection-sensitive servers every 5 to 10 minutes, but things like Netflix are working perfectly. We watched Airplane, the movie, as an inaugural stream, and it was fabulous. Buffering deployed by Netflix and other streaming services can keep videos running even when there are brief internet problems. And now there's expansion to southern U.S. in the works. The Starlink Beta could expand to the southern U.S. within the next couple of months. Asked when Florida will get Starlink, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk answered, lower latitude states need more satellites in position. So probably January. So far, beta invitations have gone out to users in Idaho, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, Montana, North Dakota, Oregon, and Washington State, as well as Wisconsin. These states are all sparsely populated and subject to many long regions where there is no internet access at all beyond very slow current satellite access or literal dial-up speeds. Users in Canada similarly should get invites to join SpaceX just as soon as last month and receive regulatory approval from Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission.
We'll put this in the category of no good deed goes unpunished. The CISA director expects to be fired following a secure election. Christopher Krebs, a top U.S. cybersecurity official, has reportedly said he expects the White House to fire him following his efforts to deliver a secure 2020 presidential election. But several senators and former Department of Homeland Security officials are rallying around Krebs and voicing support. Sources close to the matter have confirmed Krebs anticipates that he'll be fired, Reuters reports. The news arrived shortly after Brian Ware, Assistant Director of Cybersecurity at the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, reportedly handed in his resignation on November 12 at the request of the White House, sources say. Krebs, who has led CISA since 2018, reportedly sparked anger from the Trump administration when he built a website to discredit disinformation related to the election. Members of the Election Infrastructure Government Coordinating Council, or GCC, Executive Committee, and the Election Infrastructure Sector Coordinating Council say this election, quote, was the most secure in American history, end quote. Following the news that Krebs could potentially be fired, current and former government officials voiced their support for the cybersecurity leader and disagreement with the decision to remove him. Well, that's it for the blips. We've got a lot more coming up. But before we do, even though he's not here with us right now, our regular host and leader, Louis Maresca, is still there, ready to tell us about one of TWiT's great sponsors.
Well, thanks, guys. We'll get back to TWiT in just a moment. But before we do, we have to thank a great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Now, Wasabi is the perfect solution for managed service providers to sell because they can earn more while charging less. Wasabi is a game changer when it comes to cloud storage. Now, it's 80% cheaper than Amazon S3 and significantly cheaper than on-prem storage. Now, typically, you can actually store data in Wasabi's cloud for less than just the maintenance annual fees of the same amount of on-prem storage. Now, on-prem storage is expensive. It's hard to maintain, hard to get a good availability and reliability and backup. You name it, Wasabi can help. Now, Wasabi's disruptive price performance model makes buying cloud storage a natural addition. Now, there are two ways to pay. You can pay as you go, or you can pay one time with reserved capacity storage. Now, Wasabi's reserved capacity storage makes buying cloud storage a natural addition to your on-prem storage. Now, if you're thinking about buying more hardware storage, compare Wasabi's price against 5 years of reserved capacity storage. Now, you can purchase cloud storage in 1, 3, or 5 year increments and achieve a greater term and capacity discount. With Wasabi, security is often even greater than on-prem storage. They provide 11 nines of durability. That means that on average, you'll lose one file for every 649,000 years. So you're pretty much not going to lose a file. Now, Wasabi is hosted in premier Tier 4 data center facilities that are highly secure and fully redundant. Now, if you want to talk security, Wasabi is secure by default, and all data storage in the Wasabi cloud is always encrypted at rest, even if the requested party doesn't even specify encryption. In fact, Wasabi also follows industry best security models and design practices. And if you want finer grained control of your files, they have access control mechanisms such as bucket policies and access control lists that can be used to selectively grant permissions. Now, not only that, but your data is also immutable. This prevents data from being erased or even altered and protects you from hackers, malware, and even yourself. Now, Wasabi has active integrity checking where all objects are stored and checked for integrity every 90 days. Plus, if your organization is worried about compliance, Wasabi has you covered because they are HIPAA, FINRA, and CGIS compliant as well. Wasabi is not just highly secure, disruptive technology that's turning the industry on its ears. It's storage that's 80% cheaper and up to 6 times the speed of the industry leader. Calculate the savings for yourself and start a free trial of storage for a month. Go to wasabi.com, click the free trial link, and enter the code ENTERPRISE. Join the movement and migrate your data to the cloud with confidence. Go to wasabi.com and make sure that you use the offer code ENTERPRISE. And we thank Wasabi for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now back to you guys.
Thanks, Lou. We appreciate it, and we'll be back to you later on. But before we do that, it's time to talk about some more news in the bites. And first up is 9 new tactics to spread security awareness. You know, there are lots of ways to help make organizations more secure. One of them is a penetration test. The classic pen test is fabulous because it's a real world kind of simulation that goes in and finds out what's what with defenses and vulnerabilities. Many people have decried the fact that it's difficult to do phishing and spear phishing pen tests, but some recent examples show why that's hard. In a move that was criticized earlier this year, for example, newspaper giant Tribune Publishing sent out a phishing simulation to staff. The lure? Well, it was a promise of a bonus of between $5,000 and $10,000. When employees were instructed to log in to view your end-of-year bonus, they actually received a notification of enrollment in a computer security training program. What was the problem? Well, Tribune had recently laid off a bunch of people, so the survivors felt that this bonus lure wasn't as sensitive or as reasonable as it might have been. Perry Toon, who's founder of an email service firm, the XYZ, had a similar disastrous experience. They created a fake phishing site, he said, and encouraged users to click a link in the email. When they did, it informed the employee that they had failed this phony phishing test. Well, a lot of the employees saw the message come up and freaked out. They ended up spending more in calming down employees than they saved in real security. So you've got some bad ways to go about this. What are some good ways of adding to the security awareness of your firm? We've got several here. First up, make it a game. People love games. They realize that they're learning something real, but they're also having fun, and they are only so worried about, well, blowing up the production infrastructure. Games are great, especially when you pit groups against one another, teams against one another, or even individuals against the rest of the employees in the company. Number 2, onboard employees with training. So catch them while they're fresh. That helps increase the perception that security is part of the culture of the organization. That's always good. And it also gets employees when they expect to spend some time in training. Number 3, remove the stigma. Why everybody makes mistakes when it comes to security, especially if security is not their primary job. So making people aware without making them feel angry, upset, and depressed is a much better solution to getting them to be security allies rather than, well, let's face it, a tool for attackers to use. As part of that, consider your audience. So you want to make the training reasonable. You want to make it realistic, but you also want to target it toward your users. What do I mean by that? Well, every employee should undergo security training, but it's likely that developers should have different training than people on the marketing team. People who don't deal with sensitive information should have different training than than employees in finance and HR. Tailor what you teach so that you don't end up making employees feel like you're wasting their time with things that they will never need in their daily job. As part of that, too, tailor the training to their age. Now, this doesn't mean that young people are inherently safer or that older people are inherently less safe. It means that each will tend to concentrate on different aspects of security, and each needs to be encouraged in different directions. There are other things. Older people tend to want to be respected, so they might not feel as comfortable admitting they made a mistake. They don't want to lose face. Younger people are often much more interested in learning for learning's sake. After all, they're much closer to the experience of when that was their full-time job. You can use those facts to come in and help them learn more efficiently. Next up, make use of multiple media. There are meetings, videos, podcasts, written materials, interactive things, games, all kinds of media. In the same way that we've talked about tailoring the content to different organizations and different groups within the company, tailor the medium to the particular part of the message. That helps prevent people from getting bored with what they're learning, and it helps make it more vibrant and more effective. Now, I mentioned developers a while back. You absolutely want to make sure you embed security training for developers. Here on TWiT, we've talked about DevSecOps and SecDevOps and all of these other portmanteau words that mean building in security when you're building your applications. In order to do that, you have to have your developers trained on security, not just, though, for what they're making, but for the way that they're making it, teaching them some of the warning signs of repositories, some of the warning signs of particular code libraries and applets. Lets them know that you're watching and that they should care about these things. Finally, these days especially, bring the lessons home. That doesn't mean just finish with a big bang, but actually convince people that security has to start while they're working at home. No matter what their role in the organization is, they need to treat their home network and the systems they're working on at home with the same level of respect and security that they treated their systems and networks when they were sitting in the central office. Brian, I want to get to you. I know that you sleep, eat, drink, and breathe security. What do you think about these ideas? Do you hear any that strike you as silly, or do you think these are fairly solid?
Actually, this is one of the more well-written, well-researched articles I've seen on the topic. There's always a lot of, shall we say, victim shaming that tends to come with a lot of these links. I saw a few hot takes on the incident you described at Tribune Media, I believe it was, saying the users get what they get, right? They made the mistake, and this is what the real world is like. This is how attackers would try to leverage an event like a layoff to create a phishing email that might be more effective in light of the circumstances. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it, right? Is that sure, it's a more realistic attack, but creating this environment of shame and guilt, and creating this environment where suddenly the InfoSec team becomes the adversary in this scenario, right? That there's not you degrade the mutual respect, and so I really disagreed with those sort of, like I said, hot takes that said, oh well, these users, they're the ones to blame, like they should stop crying, and it's like that's not exactly how an InfoSec team really should be working to build trust with their user base. you want to instill programs where users feel free and feel proud to come forward saying, hey, maybe I clicked on something bad and you should know about this, rather than creating an environment of shame and guilt and stigma, as the article mentioned, where they'll be more likely to try to cover it up or hide it or ignore it and hope that nothing bad happens, right? So I think that's one of the key pieces I took there. I think the bring it home message too could be extended to say that these practices not only protect you and how you handle sensitive work information, but you can take these same skills into your personal life and protect your own personal information by what we're teaching you here. And I think that's a really important tip here, is to enable people to say this is not just about the company covering its own ass, but it's about enabling you, because you're an internet citizen at work and you're an internet citizen at home, and the same safety practices, just like looking both ways to cross the street, doesn't matter whether you're on work time or personal time, that's a safe thing you should do all the time. That's what I'm thinking here. Teaching people how to be safe on the internet, it's a universal skill. It's a skill that goes across your whole, sort of living existence at this point, right? The internet is a utility, just like hot running water and electricity at this point. So some really good points there that I haven't seen brought up in a lot of other venues when talking about security awareness training.
I love the idea that you were talking about to make the security group not be, well, as they were for so long, the department of no. The department that was seen as being the one group that was charged with making everyone less productive because they were always saying that you couldn't do stuff. Do you think that in some organizations it might be time to start making non-security team employees a more formal part of the security group? In so many ways, things like fire drills, you'll have floor marshals and team marshals to help make sure that all of their coworkers are out and accounted for. Are there things that could be done to make people, say, security marshals, to help their teams be more secure and be sort of a liaison between frontline teams and security teams?
That's a great idea, Curt. I haven't heard that one before, but it's a great analogy, and it really does. When you deputize someone and say, this is your responsibility within your team, help your teammates, be more secure, be the liaison. It's the person that they know, that they work with on a day-to-day basis, that they can come to if they believe they've, had a security incident of some sort. They feel they've got an infected attachment, or maybe I accidentally clicked on a bad link. Could you help me figure this out or report it? Embedding someone who's security minded in the team as a diplomat certainly is a great way to again extend a partnership with security. Let people know that the security team's here to protect the company and protect you as an individual user, right? That's an absolutely fantastic idea. I wish I'm going to steal that next time I'm talking to customers. That's absolutely something that is a good way to kind of build those bridges instead of as you said, being the department of no. And in my prior life before F5, I was a member of such a department, and that was actually one of my mantras. I'm like, guys, gals on my team, I would say, hey, our job is to make people more productive. So let's figure out how to do that. When we used to plan for site reliability, we actually would reach out to different business stakeholders, right? We reached out to HR and finance and say, hey, what is it you would need? Like, let's walk through the smoking crater scenario. What do you need for us to get back up and running as quick as possible? And I maintained a small council of line of business leaders who were invested in what our site reliability planning looked like from a data integrity perspective, and just that's in that same mode of thinking. Having information security deputies or marshals within teams sounds like a fantastic idea.
Well, I'm in favor of anything that gets me a cool new ball cap issued by the company. So I think that's the way to go.
I don't know about you, but I'm missing the sultry sound of Lou Maresca's voice. And he's right on standby to tell us about another great TWiT sponsor.
Well, thank you, guys. We'll get back to TWiT and the great guest that's coming up. But before we do, we have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Barracuda. The Barracuda is the provider of cloud-enabled enterprise-grade security solutions that protect email networks, data, and applications. Suddenly you have dozens, hundreds, or maybe thousands of employees working remotely. Each one of them are getting tons of emails each and every day, making them vulnerable. 95% of all cyber attacks start in an email. Spear phishing, ransomware, account takeover, conversation hijacking. Multiply that by how many employees times how many emails. One click on the wrong email can cost you money, customers, and even your reputation. Now, Barracuda researchers have been seeing a steady increase in the number of coronavirus-related spear phishing attacks since January, and they've actually observed a recent spike of 667% in this type of attack since the end of February. Get the protection you need for your company with Barracuda Total Email Protection. It includes a ton of stuff. Listen to all this. All-in-one email security backup and archiving. It also has AI-based protection for spear phishing, account takeover, and business email compromise. And it has automated incident response that gives you options to quickly and efficiently address your attacks when they come in. Now, security awareness training to educate your workforce so your employees can be the first line of defense against the attacks. Now, we've covered this a couple times on TWiT, but in the current climate, the bad guys, they're targeting people using social engineering techniques here. They actually impersonate organizations like the UN World Health Organization or the CDC because they want to trick users. They want to trick them into opening malicious emails and navigating to their sites so that they can then open up those coded sites and their devices are now the attackers. Now, in the case of some of the new attacks where hackers are actually impersonating the organizations like World Health Organization, attackers actually utilize domain spoofing and promise information relating to the coronavirus to trick users into phishing scams. Now, it's time to take back the control of your security. Ensure the safety and security of your business with Barracuda. To uncover the threats hiding in your inbox, get a secure, free email threat scan of your Office 365 account, risk-free, at barracuda.com/enterprise. That's barracuda.com/enterprise. Barracuda, your journey secured. And we thank Barracuda for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now back to you guys.
Well, thanks, Lou.
But we've got another bite. Rarely do people think of black hat hackers and criminals as salt of the earth types, but there are some groups that are going beyond the pale and being particularly evil in their target of choice these days. Brian, what do you have to tell us about these extra nefarious criminals that we're seeing these days?
Well, it's almost hard to believe because so many of the attacks that we've seen over time have all been about, sometimes it'll be at groups like Anonymous who are either engaging in hacktivism or simple mischief, or it's simple, I'm going to take down your site unless you wire some money. These types of things are just simple site defacement. In general, lives have not been at stake. Now we've seen a ransomware group targeting hospitals at the height of this global pandemic. And if you're not familiar with ransomware, it's all about locking up data in an encrypted file and basically making that data unavailable until a ransom is paid. Now, a Russian-speaking ransomware group in this case had begun targeting hospitals in the United States. And according to, this is from a joint statement from 3 of our federal agencies. The statement says the TrickBot malware, which is pretty well known at this point, along with ransomware payload, locks up machines until the hospitals pay a ransom often exceeding $1 million. Now, the 3 agencies are the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, which was mentioned in an earlier blip, the FBI, the Department of Health and Human Services. And according to the statement, the attack started back on October 26th of 2020. Now, CISA, FBI, and HHS have credible information of increased imminent cybercrime threat to U.S. hospitals and healthcare providers, according to the statement. CISA, FBI, and HHS are sharing this information to provide warning to healthcare providers to ensure they take timely and reasonable precautions to protect their networks from these threats. The malware attacks also include data theft and disruption of healthcare services, and appear to be timed to take advantage of the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The malware is launched when employees click on an infected link, as is the case in every phishing attack and every other attack that we've been talking about. And these links appear in documents that appear to be internal communications and contain attachments from Google Docs or PDF files. Now, the ominous alert of impending destructive cyber attacks against hospitals is a credible threat and should be taken seriously, said Tom Kellerman, head of cybersecurity strategy at VMware Carbon Black. The Russian cybercrime cartel, who developed and distributed TrickBot and Ryuk, appear to be retaliating against recent NSA and Microsoft takedown of portions of their e-crime infrastructure. This is cyber payback and could mean a matter of life and death amid the pandemic if critical hospital systems are disrupted or destroyed, interrupting patient care, said Kellerman. Now, generally, ransomware attackers appear to avoid actions that lead to the potential loss of life, sort of an internal code among the black hats. But in this case, it appears that risk was intentional, right, to take advantage of the imminent threat and the overloaded nature of the hospital systems during these pandemic times and lead to ultimately bigger payouts. One death in Germany has already been attributed to such an attack. So what can we do? Well, there are various steps that several hospitals and other organizations can always take to protect themselves against malware attacks and, in particular, ransomware attacks. Now, first of all, let's talk about the previous bite. Make sure every user in your system says, don't click on any link, no matter how innocent it may look. This is cybersecurity awareness 101. Just don't click on anything. And if you're in the hospital, especially don't click on anything. This goes beyond the usual cautioning about suspicious links, obviously, because the malware is being distributed in ways that don't appear suspicious. These are very targeted phishing attacks and appear in text messages or video conferences, in addition to email. Obviously, system hygiene. Make sure all your systems are up to date and have current patches. Easier said than done, but do the best you can. You want to scan your backups looking for malware. You want to make sure you have recent backups. That's an easy way to short circuit a ransomware attack, even if it is successful. Somebody does make the mistake and click on the link. You've got a backup. It's ready to go, and it's not got malware in the backup. So make sure that haven't been previously compromised with the malware to be working along. That's already sitting in your backup. So it might have been a long con, if you will. And then where possible, you want to change out your network security settings, filter out active links and emails, and strip those attachments. Right. So there's a lot of services that employ this. If you're in Office 365, it's actually built in to Office 365 for most customers. You might have to up-level your licensing, but certainly look into things that will actively scan, looking for these types of links and attachments. And then, if you have critical systems, in the case of a hospital, get these things off the internet, air gap them. Don't put them on open Wi-Fi, for example. These are the types of things that need to happen, things that you can do right away in order to get yourself in good shape to avoid being leveraged by one of these particularly malicious groups. Now, longer term, you need rapid response plans. You need micro-segmentation, zero trust concepts to prevent any malware from spreading. Even if somebody does click on it, you can contain the problem. You also want to implement multi-factor authentication. There's nothing more powerful to prevent automated attacks and malware-based attacks than MFA. Multi-factor, we certainly would like to see more use of app-based multi-factor than, say, SMS multi-factor, but any multi-factor is better than none right now. Now, you also want, and I just mentioned this in the previous bite, we also want to have a continuity plan, right? How do we handle what I call the smoking crater scenario, right? If everything in our central location is wiped off the face of the earth, how do we get back up and running? So you're going to want to have backups that are a minimum safe distance from your current location, so that you can go and get it and have a good offsite and remote storage plan. and then have an IT lockdown plan. What do I do in terms of incident response? Now, none of this can directly prevent the ransomware attack, but it can minimize your damage and get you back up and running and speed your recovery. Now, it's critical that you rehearse these steps, because if you haven't practiced your continuity and recovery steps, then when it's time to put them into action, you're going to be stumbling. So with all that being said, Curt, we've covered this type of thing for, certainly my entire time as a co-host on TWiT. So this is certainly not new. Do we need to go back to simpler times, single-use workstations that don't have a general-purpose operating system with IE and browsers and all sorts of extraneous apps on it? Is that something that we have to go back to at this point?
Well, we see a lot of people who are talking about thin clients, people using RDP to go from what is basically a screen, keyboard, and mouse back to centralized virtual desktops. And that's something that many organizations are using. I, as a matter of fact, have seen a number of healthcare organizations taking exactly that approach for the reason of security, even more than the other reasons that come in, things like manageability and keeping patient information private, all those things. To me, the interesting thing about these kinds of attacks that we're starting to see on the healthcare organizations is that they are a sign that many of the healthcare organizations actually have been listening. Because at Dark Reading, we've reported on a number of attacks where there is the exfiltration and extortion side of the attack on top of the ransomware. So they'll go ahead and they'll encrypt the disk, but they assume that the healthcare organization is going to either find a way to unencrypt the information, or they have good backups and can get to unencrypted data. And so they say, hey, just in case you were thinking about cutting us out of the action, we've taken these, 40% of your patient records, and we'll start releasing them on the dark web, including all of their personal identifiable information, and therefore subject you to mountains of HIPAA fines unless you go ahead and pony up for the decryption key. Ultimately, I think we've got to get to avoidance of the problem. We've got to really lean hard on keeping the ransomware out of the systems, because whatever we do to respond to ransomware, the attackers are working around.
It was mentioned in the article that someone actually died in a hospital in Germany, and it raises the question. And Curt, I believe you have a little more detail here of potential collateral damage. Like, why can't we hack back? Why is it always just us battening down the hatches? What's the rub here? What's the story here?
Well, there are two big rubs on that kind of thing. The why can't we attack back? One of them is that it is so devilishly hard to pin an attack on a specific actor. Now, we can say that it belongs to a particular APT group. We can look at things, but who are the members of that group? They tend not to have business cards that they hand out with addresses on them. There's not a building in downtown, name your favorite hive of hacking, that has, Fancy Bear on top of it. It's tough knowing who we should attack. And letting the might of a major enterprise or a government go after the wrong target could be devastating. I mean, it's not life-threatening in the same way it would be when the police, say, end up shooting someone who is not an actual perpetrator, but it can still be very substantial, and it can have huge political ramifications if those people are in another country. So that's really difficult. The other is figuring out what's proportional. I mean, do we just go in and block the communications? Do we just shut down all of the conversations and traffic involving a particular threat actor? Do we go in and do a Stuxnet kind of attack to try to physically damage their hardware? What's proportional? So there are some really serious questions out there. And unfortunately, these are questions that the attackers don't have to worry about, because we've already seen, as we've talked about in the case in Germany, where a patient died, the hospital wasn't apparently the actual target of the attack. It was a university that the hospital happened to be associated with. So this is what they call asymmetrical warfare. We have lots of resources on the side of the good guys, and that's constrained by lots of rules and ethics and laws. The attackers tend to have fewer resources, but they have a great deal more freedom in how they deploy them, because frankly, if they get it wrong, it doesn't cost them anything. So as long as that's the case, I don't know that there's a clear solution, and I wish I knew a good way to make that not be the case anymore.
Curt, I would love to continue digging deep into this topic. This is right in my wheelhouse of things I love to chat about. But even more favorite than that is a great guest that we have on standby from Server Central. But first, we need to call on the spirit of Louis Maresca just one more time to tell us about one more great sponsor.
Well, thank you, guys. We'll get back to the fabulous guests in just a moment. But before we do, we have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Melissa. Now, have you ever forgotten to check the date on a carton of milk? I know I have, because it's easy to store it away and just forget about it. And like milk, your customer data can also go bad, sometimes even faster than milk. Now, to put it in perspective, up to 30% of customer data goes bad each and every year. Now, think about all your customers in that customer base. That's a lot of customers. Now, that's when Melissa's there for you. Melissa makes sure your data is accurate and current so you can reach the right people, your customers. Now, you did the work to make them your customers. Melissa makes it so you can have reliable customer data as well. Now, if you're wondering how effective Melissa is, just know that they have been helping businesses maintain fresh data for over 35 years. Now, Melissa can help you verify addresses, emails, phone numbers, and names in real time with Melissa. Now, Melissa's global address verification service verifies addresses for 240 plus countries and territories at the point of entry. Now, this ensures that only valid billing and shipping addresses are captured and are used in your systems. Now, think about how valuable it could be if your organization could identify your customers and get to know them better. You could add customer demographic information to records such as property or mortgage data, even marital status or social media handles. Melissa's flexible deployment options offer different platforms to suit any preference, business size, or budget. Now, with flexible on-premise web service, secure FTP processing, and software as a service delivery options, you can choose the best way to meet your unique business needs. Now, you all know I'm the API guy. I live and breathe them every day, and I use Melissa's APIs, and I can really easily get the data you need for my customers when I need it, when you need to use it. Now, I think USPS needs to use Melissa because I put my mail on the hold just recently, and when it was time for redelivery, an autocomplete fail caused my mail to be delivered to the wrong guy down the street. And if they had Melissa, they would know that wasn't the right address. Plus, if you want to talk about security and compliance, Melissa continually undergoes independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, privacy, compliance, and more requirements. Now, they have the utmost dedication to your data security by implementing strong controls and safeguards when processing your data. They are also SOC 2, HIPAA, and GDPR compliant as well. Now, over 10,000 businesses trust the address experts. And with the holiday season right around the corner, it's time to take control of your customer data. Trust Melissa to be your foundation for data-driven success. Melissa supporting communities and qualifying essential workers during COVID-19. See if your organization qualifies for 6 months of free service by applying online. Don't put up with sour customer data. Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log on, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. /twit. And we thank Melissa for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now back to you guys.
Thanks, Lou. Really appreciate that. And we really appreciate our next guest because he's here to help us, well, if not dispel, at least understand more clearly some common misunderstandings. You know, for the longest time, the argument in favor of cloud computing came down to go to the cloud instead of on-premises solutions and you'll save money. Every time, no question, going to the cloud, you'll save money. Well, we found out that that's not necessarily so. Maybe you'll save money, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll have better performance, maybe you won't. Well, how do you figure that out? Chris Rechtsteiner of Server Central's touring group is all about figuring out whether you'll save money, whether you'll see other benefits, and how you can tell what those benefits might be. Chris, welcome to TWiT.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, before we get deeply into this, I've got two questions to ask you, and I'm going to start with the touring group. We know what Server Central is, but what is the touring group within Server Central?
Sure, and that's a good question. So Server Central dates back over 20 years and really began providing data center and managed infrastructure capabilities. And about 2.5 years ago, we acquired an organization called Turing Group. And Turing Group was one of the very first AWS MSPs in the world. And what Turing Group brought to the party and really the organization today is the ability to deliver the complex public cloud managed services that organizations need so they can take advantage of what the cloud truly has to offer. You mentioned the concept around performance benefits, around cost benefits, those sort of inherent expectations of the cloud. That's really the expertise that Turing Group had, and was one of the reasons why it was so important from the Server Central side for the organizations to join together and really be able to serve companies across the entire continuum of their enterprise IT portfolio.
Outstanding. Well, we're going to be talking a great deal more about that. But before we do, one of the things that is traditional here on TWiT that we know our audience enjoys is hearing how you came to be where you are at Turing Group. How did you start in the industry, and how did your path lead you from wherever your beginning was to where you're sitting now?
Oh, it was winding. How much time do we have? No, my career began back in the telco days, right, about the time of divestiture. So I came into technology when it was the order of the day to try and figure out how to break up the Bell system and turn it into really successful regional operating companies that could provide services for both consumers and businesses in very intelligent ways. And one of the little sort of hidden facts of all of that was that on the business side of that equation were an incredible number of very sophisticated services that nobody really recognized or understood that these companies were providing. And to make a very long story short, it really became the sort of foundation of what software as a service offers would be, right, where the network was providing the service itself. And over time, that really evolved from my perspective on a personal level into different types of organizations that did provide services, applications, products on top of the network. And as the SaaS universe really came to be following that evolution, and really the common thread through all of it is, and not to date myself on it, but it's the idea of bringing capabilities to organizations that they otherwise wouldn't be able to have. So for years, it would take an incredible investment in order to have very sophisticated compute capabilities, and that's been solved with what you can do with the cloud. Before that, it was the ability to manage and maintain really common infrastructure, things like email that needed to be managed more intelligently and more securely. And so at the core of what my career arc has really been is helping people understand and introduce those types of technologies that seem mundane when you look back at them, but at the time are really unique and innovative. And sort of I would say the pinnacle of that was a number of years ago working for an organization that introduced email management systems. And at the time, we'd said, your customers are emailing you and you're not answering them. You're just waiting for them to call you. So when they email you and you don't reply, you're not happy. They're not happy. And companies would say, if it mattered, they'd call us. Email's irrelevant. Nobody cares. And it really couldn't be further from the truth. It was more important than the phone calls. It was more valuable. It was more profitable for those relationships to be maintained. So it's kind of a silly example of the types of problems that we try and solve. But that's really where my passion lies, is identifying opportunities and seeing what difference those types of technologies can make, and then helping them become so common that people laugh about it a few years later that it was ever something they never had.
It's really interesting, a good path. And I think it helps us understand not only how you got there, but what you're doing. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask, when you begin to engage with one of your customers, are you always asking the same set of questions? Is the set of questions going to be specific to an industry or to a company? How do you help a company begin to understand what they should be doing in terms of their investment in and spending on the cloud?
That's a great question. And what we typically do is we look at what the business outcome is. What do they want to achieve? Because at the end of the day, the technology in the cloud is just that. It's technology. It's compute. It's memory. It's storage. It's bandwidth. It's lots of very intelligent services that layer on top of that. But at its core, it's those common services. And they can be applied in myriad ways. So unless you know what the business challenge is, what the goal is, it doesn't really matter. So when we come in to any organization, the first thing we try and do is really understand where they are, why they want to be someplace else, right? There's a project driving this. They want to invest in new technology. They want to introduce a new product or service, whatever it may be. Something's driving it. What is it? Why do they want to achieve it? What is the time frame? And really, what are the financial implications of doing it? Because in many instances, understanding what that financial expectation is becomes critical to how you can architect a system. You're certainly not going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in creating an environment for a product or service that will never return on that investment. And that seems silly to say, but it's very important to have those two aligned. So at the core of that, it comes down to, what do they want to do? What does that end state look like? And once we understand that, and there's really a lot of alignment between our organization and theirs, and also within their organization, it was equally important, then we can start to ask those more common technical questions. And that's going to be much more specific to each organization because of how they've built their applications today. But what it'll really come down to is what ultimately is not working for them and what do they need that's caused this decision or this opportunity to present itself.
You were talking about how they built their applications. My co-host Brian, I know he has some questions that begin on that very basis. Brian?
Hey, thanks, Curt. Chris, one thing that comes up a lot in my work at F5 is the notion of multi-cloud. What's my multi-cloud strategy? And it sounds, sort of a little bit abstract. And, it strikes me that might be something that you have some rather direct experience with Server Central Turing Group. Can you tell us a little bit about what your customers are asking you with respect to multi-cloud and hybrid cloud strategies?
Certainly. And it's an interesting topic because the benefit in multi-cloud, and we were just talking about this in a meeting earlier today, which is timing's everything. And multi-cloud has a significant role in organizations. And I think that for a company to say that they're going to invest and be 100% in on a single cloud platform, I think that's a nice goal to strive towards, but I don't necessarily know that it's real. And the reality of that is the fact that different platforms have very different strengths. There are certain things that AWS does well that Azure doesn't do as well, or GCP doesn't do as well, and vice versa. And really based upon the workloads that you have, or the application, depending upon how you want to look at it, those platforms are going to be able to deliver a substantially higher amount of value. And the challenge in that is really the definition of multi-cloud, because if you try and homogenize the cloud through a common control plane, what you're doing is you're in effect removing all of the uniqueness of that platform. You have abstracted it to nothing more than compute, memory, storage, and bandwidth. So all of the uniqueness that you can apply, the benefits, the time saving, the cost savings, that come from those cloud platforms, when you use their native tools, get wiped away. So multi-cloud as a strategy of having different workloads in different places to take advantage of what the cloud platforms do best is absolutely something organizations are going to do and pursue. Whether someone wants to abstract that through a common administration and management plane, that's a little bit more difficult question, because it really does start to pose some challenges that aren't easy to overcome.
So maybe a follow-up question to that. Can you maybe then talk a little bit about, you talk about 100% all in on a certain cloud. Can you talk about maybe some of the pitfalls of what's known as cloud lock-in? You talk about the uniqueness of a platform. When does the uniqueness of a platform, how do you thread that fine line between the uniqueness becoming, going from a strength and becoming maybe a weakness or a vulnerability, through things like lock-in to that platform?
Man, I wish there was a simple answer for that. Everybody would be really happy. I'd be really, really happy. I think that threading that needle, though, when we talk with our customers, when we talk with partners, everybody sort of in our ecosystem, that idea of threading the needle really comes down to tying back to the business. And you mentioned earlier a very important point, and you were talking about security, and you said that maybe we need to get back to basics. Maybe we need to get back to this simpler time. And I think that when you look at the cloud platforms, there's a lot of truth in that. And there's a lot of truth in the sense that, what is the basic thing you're trying to do? What is it that you want to accomplish? And why do you need to accomplish it? Because what we see happen is organizations get sideways when they lose connection between the business and the technology. And that seems very, very simple, and it seems silly to say, but it is incredibly common. And so whenever you have those challenges that come up, it really becomes a matter of making sure that everything stays aligned. And that alignment sounds fluffy, it sounds kind of hand-wavy, but it's really true. And it doesn't take a lot for that to get sideways. And when you can keep everything aligned, you can take advantage of those platforms, and you can take advantage of what the outcomes are. Now, back to your point about lock-in, what happens then is that because the workloads are specific to that platform and you're evolving in that area, those are larger architecture questions. Those are larger architecture decisions. And if you have something that, say, has a 5-year or 7-year shelf life as a product or service, that 5 or 7 year window for lock-in might be perfectly acceptable. But because that's the nature of the business, the nature of that product or service, you go ahead and you accept that risk. In other instances, it might be something that is so new and so early in its development that you can't do that. You don't want to assume that risk on the lock-in side. So you might need to abstract that or look at a slightly different application architecture as well as your infrastructure architecture to support it. And that's a whole giant wormhole of conversations and architecture diagrams to make the determination of the right way to pursue it. But it really does come down to what is that outcome? Because lock-in is really only ever a problem when you don't want to be there, and you shouldn't be there if you were planning for where you were going and regularly and intelligently and effectively managing what you were executing. So it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to that alignment with the business and making sure that everything does stay on course, and that the visibility of that is consistent organization-wide.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I think our listeners really gained a lot from the insights you shared there. And no, it wasn't an easy answer, but I think it was a good one. Curt, I think you had one more question before we get to wrapping up here.
Absolutely. And Chris, this is one that we try to ask everyone. When someone is listening to this and interested in perhaps considering an engagement with your group, how do they get started? Is this one where they have to be a Server Central customer before they can ever reach you? Is there a way for them to get started with you? What's the process there?
Sure. So everything that we do is open and available to anyone. So all of the cloud, the software development, the DevOps consulting, the professional services side of our business is obviously available to the traditional Server Central customer group, but it's also available to any organization that is looking to solve these types of challenges. So what we typically do on an initial introduction or an initial project with a customer is identify what is a tangible business challenge they're trying to solve. And it could be something very simple like addressing a business continuity issue. It could be helping understand a challenge that exists in a current cloud architecture. There's any number of different questions that come up, but that's typically where it will start. Is there'll be one pain point or one really key objective that they want to pursue, and then that will be the catalyst for that conversation. And where that ultimately ends, right? Does that end in the cloud? Does it end in the data center? Does it end in a hybrid environment? What cloud platforms are involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all really based upon what those outcomes are. And the benefit of it is that we have those tools at our disposal to be able to do the right thing in the right way and really provide what the customer is expecting to see at the end of it, not what they think they're going to see day one, but where they're ultimately going to land, because that's what it's all about. Do you achieve that goal? Do you reach that outcome? And we really try and remain focused on that. And that's, that first step. And sometimes that first step is the hardest one, but once you take it, then you sort of have a really good sense of the direction you're going and where you can ultimately land.
Well, Chris, we really appreciate you being here today. I will ask, is there some place, you've given us some great information, is there some place that you're regularly putting out information like this, blog, podcast, regular series of leather-bound books? How can people keep up with your wisdom and your thoughts in the IT industry?
Well, thank you. Yes, smoke signals tend to work really well these days. I like the leather-bound book idea. That's pretty good. No, the best place to follow it is really, and I would recommend for everybody, follow the Server Central on whatever social platform you prefer. We aggregate a lot of information. We have some incredibly smart people that care more about technology than any other organization that I've ever been a part of. And being in the startup game for a long time, that's a lot of organizations. But people really, truly do care about all of this. And I would say dive in and ask questions. I mean, the best thing you can do, pay attention to what we're putting out there, ask questions, reach out. We're here. We do answer. There are real people behind all of it. We don't outsource any of this. So when you ask a question, you're going to get a really intelligent answer. And it's probably going to come from one of our internal experts, because that's where the question will ultimately get routed. And that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that that information is available. And if I'm the right person to answer it, then you'll hear from me. And if not, you'll hear from someone else. I can just, on the scroll, Tom Kiblin, who is one of our most creative and brilliant solution developers I've ever worked with.
Well, our guest has been Chris Rechtsteiner of Server Central Touring Group. We appreciate all of the information he's been able to give us in a great episode of TWiT, and we appreciate you for being here with us and making it such a great episode. Before we go, Brian, I got to talk to you, my co-host today. I appreciate you being here, keeping me from having to do all of this alone. Now, what's up with you this week? Where can people find you? And are they going to find you head down somewhere or just taking it easy?
Well, you won't find me because I'll be heads down with F5 Sales Kickoff Conference for the year. We're doing it virtually for the first time in my 13 years at F5, so it's quite a bit different and a whole new set of challenges for us to deliver a great training event for our salespeople and sales engineers. But if you want to catch some interesting stuff with F5 and you're into the whole podcast and live stream thing, every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, or I believe 12:30 p.m. Pacific, you can catch our Dev Central crew over on YouTube live streaming every Thursday. They get great guests in themselves, and they talk all things security, application delivery, DevOps, NGINX, Shape security. So lots of great F5 guests on that live stream. So if you want to see what's going on at F5 and you like this format, every Thursday, 3:30. Go check them out over on the F5's official YouTube channel.
We very much appreciate that. Now, as for me, you can, as always, find me at Dark Reading, and especially the edge of Dark Reading. I have some interesting things coming up. I'm doing interviews around the upcoming Black Hat Europe conference. So talking to some fascinating people there. And have a couple of great articles, I think, coming up on things like how printers are more dangerous than you might think. So come on over, follow me on Twitter at KG4GWA or on Instagram at Curt_Franklin. I'll always tell you about the articles that I have over on Dark Reading. And now, once again, thank you. We appreciate you being here. You know, we could not and would not do this without you, our audience. We'll look forward to seeing you next time when we'll have a full complement of hosts and another great guest. And as always, if you want to know what's going on in the big wide world of enterprise IT, we'll just keep quiet.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am Ant Pruitt, host at TWiT TV. Got a question for you. Have you gotten tired of how bad your photos are looking every time you post them to Instagram? Better yet, have you gotten yourself a new camera and you can't quite figure out why the images just don't look that good? Well, I have a solution for you. It's my show, Hands-On Photography. Each and every Thursday, I sit down and share different tips and tricks that are going to help make you a better photographer and a better post processor. So subscribe today at twit.tv/hop to learn more.